Yeah, we welcome everybody to the ORION meeting. This is a slightly 1 week delayed meeting for May 2020. And I'm going to turn it over to one of our two vice presidents, one of our two program chairpersons.
Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce the speaker tonight, Don Spong, who is another vice president of ORION, and he has been a member of ORION for several years, I guess about 3 years. And his main interest in astronomy is to take pictures of remote objects with a telescope. He gave another presentation last year that was presented a lot of pictures that were very good. He works also at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the Plasma Theory and Modeling Group, and his education is in nuclear engineering. He has an undergraduate degree from the University of Arizona and a master's and a PhD from the University of Michigan, also in nuclear engineering. And he joined Oak Ridge National Laboratory in 1975, and he has been working mainly in fusion, energy, plasma transport, kinetic theory, plasma turbulence, Monte Carlo methods, stellarator design, and plasma processing for semiconductors. He's also a fellow of the American Physical Society, and he has a lot of awards that I'm not going to mention here because I will take too much of his time. Besides working at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and doing taking photography of remote objects in the sky, he also likes scuba diving, bicycling, hiking, and caving. So it is my pleasure to have Don Spong with us tonight. So Don, you are on.
Okay, thank you, Juan. So I'll see if I can share my screen here. So I look back and I gave a talk on astrophotography about a year ago, well, slightly over a year ago, which I titled Astrophotography for People in a Hurry. And so I'm going to do some updates on that. Part of it is I've decided I'm not quite as much a hurry now as I felt like I was then, maybe, because I was trying to rapidly learn how to get started with it. And I chose kind of easy pathways to do a lot of things. And now I'm coming back and realizing that some of these things I have to improve my game at. So these are the topics I was going to discuss. And some of them are fairly basic things, but again, as you get into photography, you have to do them a little more carefully than you might otherwise do it. So the first area is, well, here's just a picture of my equipment. So I've got a 8-inch Celestron Edge HD telescope, Schmidt-Cassegrain, and I have, I don't know if can you see my cursor on this?
Yes.
So I have a 60 millimeter guide scope and camera on it. I also have a sight scope with a sort of a red reticle on it that I use to when I want to get approximately aimed at certain stars. And then this thing over here is something Celestron sells that has a camera in it that auto aligns the scope so you can use the go-to capability easily. And then here in the left-hand picture, I show the camera I'm using for the imaging, which is a ZWO-183, and then it's attached to a Hyperstar attachment here if I want really wide-angle viewing, or I can attach the camera to the back here if I want to go to more narrow angles. So the first thing I found that had to be, especially if you want to start doing auto guiding, is you have to get the balance a little better than you might normally do. And so the first step is you have to get the declination balanced. And so you rotate the scope over like this, and the way you control the declination balance, that is, that you release the clutch here for the up and down movement. And if it drops this way, which it can if you have a heavy camera on that end, then you may have to move, put the telescope back up and move it back along this orange dovetail attachment. So you move it kind of back and forth till you get the declination balance right. And then once you get that, you close off this clutch and then open up this one, and you get the balance on the right ascension, which is the movement this way. And so you control that with these weights that you attach to it. And you can get that, of course, pretty precise if you have enough weight. But the virtue is that you want to get the balance pretty good, because that means your motors don't have to do as much work, both for the tracking and the auto guiding. So it it works better if you get the thing fairly well balanced to start off with. And then, of course, the next thing is the polar alignment. Again, as you go to longer focal lengths, this starts becoming quite crucial. Now, I happen to, since I do a lot of my viewing recently from my house, I have trees to the north and I can't see Polaris. So what I typically do is I start off, when I first set up the scope, I use an iPhone app that gives me an approximate orientation to Polaris using the GPS in the iPhone, I guess, and the magnetic compass. So I attach that to a wood extension here, so it's not too close to the iron in the mount. And then you rotate the mount sideways and up and down till you get this this crosshair centered in the reticle here. Then, of course, if I'm out at the observatory, I'll directly sight on Polaris, and I can get that pretty close. The other thing I typically use here is this StarSense camera that I use for the alignment of the go-to part of the scope. It also has a polar alignment option where you can, once you do the alignment on stars for the orientation of the go-to, you can tell it to do a polar alignment on a given star, which you can choose, and it will slew the telescope to where it thinks that star should be, and of course you won't be right at the star, and then you can adjust the azimuth and altitude so that you're aligned right on that star, and then redo the alignment, and that gets you quite close to it. The other thing I've started using recently is drift alignment. I'd been aware of this for some time, but it sounded kind of tedious until I actually tried it, and it's really not that hard. You first identify a star that's near the meridian, which is kind of towards the south, 60 to 70 degrees above the horizon, and you focus on that, and it will generally be drifting a little bit one way or the other, and so you turn your eyepiece. You need a crosshair reticle on your eyepiece. So you turn that so that the drift is along one of the axes. And then you adjust the azimuth on the mount so that you null out that drift as close as you can. Usually you adjust it till the drift change directions, and then you go back a little bit till it's quite small. And then you sight on a star in the east about 20 degrees above horizon and do the same thing, only you adjust the altitude in this case to null out the drift. And so you can do this, and if you really want to get it precise, you can put in a Barlow and go to a long focal length and do it. But it generally gets pretty good just doing it with a normal eyepiece.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
how do you hook the cell phone up to the mount? Is it through Bluetooth?
No, you don't have to hook it to the mount. You just attach it to some I made a piece of wood that I attach it to like this.
Focal, through the focal plane?
Yeah, so you're just using the compass in the cell phone basically. And the cell phone also has a I guess it's through the accelerometer. It tells when you're level and when you're above level, and so that gives you the azimuth,
Oh, you mean
or the altitude.
it's just a physical attachment?
Yeah, you just attach it to the top of the mount somehow.
Well, okay, thank
Yeah, no, you may be missing. He has a picture of it here on his show screen over in the right-hand corner.
you. I see it now. I missed it
Yeah.
before. I didn't
Yeah.
look before. Thank you. I get it. That's cool. I did not know about that.
Yeah, so that you don't get it real precise that way, but it's a good starting point. And of course, the other thing is focusing. Now, you can, I mean, there's several ways you can do this. You can try to minimize the star size on this, either on your computer screen or in the eyepiece. And they're actually, some of the software will do this for you or guide you to the minimal star size. I haven't really used that too much. But I also have this thing called a Batonov mask, which I put over the front of the telescope. And so it makes diffraction patterns on the star. And the idea is to get it so this center peak here is symmetric between the two side peaks. And if you can get that centered, you're quite good in focus. So I tend to use that method for focusing.
Don?
Yeah.
Ted here.
Yeah.
I've tried several different things, and the one that I have the best luck with is choosing a medium bright star, like 4th or 5th magnitude, and blowing the hell up out of the image, like to 600% enlargement, and going to a very fast exposure, like 1,000th of a second. And then there's so few pixels taken up by it, might be like 10 by 10 pixels. I can sharpen that down to a really good focus.
Yeah.
That works for me better than anything else I've tried.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's another good idea as to how to do it. Then the other thing that I have some control over in this telescope is the image viewing angle. I have three focal length options. The standard one is the f10 2032 millimeter focal length, and so that gives me a viewing angle 0.32 by 0.2 degrees, which is fairly long focal length. And then I have a focal length reducer that I screw onto the back of the telescope here, and that cuts it down to f7, which gives me a little wider angle. And then this hyperstar attachment, which takes the place of the secondary mirror, and that gives you a very bright f1.9 and an even shorter focal length and a bigger viewing angle. So if you're viewing something like Andromeda, which is a big spread out thing, I typically like to use the hyperstar attachment, since the other two options would give you a much narrower view of that. But if you're viewing, smaller galaxies like here's M51, the Whirlpool galaxy, ideally I would go just to the standard focal length. I haven't quite gotten pictures of that yet, but I'll show some I've gotten here with this focal length reducer, which is not too bad compared to the standard focal length. But basically that allows you to zoom in on the galaxy better than you could with this very wide angle option. The trade-off is, of course, you have to get the alignment and you have to do auto guiding pretty much if you go to the longer focal lengths, because it becomes much more sensitive to any kind of movement in the telescope or any off alignment. Then the question, the thing I've started doing recently is auto guiding, and so I use this auto guiding scope here with a smaller camera, and I use the PhD2 software, which stands for Push Here Dummy. That it's meant to be kind of simple to get started with. It has lots of controls, but you can get started doing things with it. There are some other options that I've experimented with, for example, one called K-Stars, but so far I haven't had too much luck with it. It's a little more complicated to use. Now, what I've run into is there are several options for connecting your computer to the mount, because you want to control the mount position with through your computer. The first one, and the easiest to use, is where you have this cable that goes from the auto guiding camera into the mount auto guiding port here. This works okay, but it's not considered ideal, since all it does is send pulses from the computer to the mount, which control the stepper motors in the mount. So it's sort of just a basic level of doing it. There's also supposed to be a way to run the computer through the USB connection to the hand controller, and I haven't gotten this to work so far. You have to have a software driver to do that, and on the Mac it's the Indy driver. On the Windows machine, use an ASCOM driver. And like I said, I haven't really gotten that to work. But I ended up, in looking around some of the blogs and websites, I found that people like to use a box here called GPUSB, which has a USB connection to your computer, and then this ST4 connection to the mount controller. And that doesn't require any software driver. You plug it in and PhD2 automatically recognizes it, and it just seems to work pretty good. So it gives you a little more information from the mount to the computer than the camera connection does, and it actually gives you the mount position at any point in time. It also uses optoelectronic couplings between the computer and the mount, which they claim is good for avoiding ground loops. I don't know how likely it is you get a ground loop, but if you're not aware what that means, it's your computer may have a different ground plane than the electronics in your mount, and if it's at a different voltage level, you can get interference with the signals and strange phenomena going on. So this box here, this GPUS USB, takes care of that by preventing any direct connection between the computer, or any direct electronic communication between the computer and the mount. It's all done through these optoelectronic couplings.
Ron?
Yeah.
I was able to do step 2 of running USB cable through the hand controller.
Oh, okay.
And I think I've got an ASCOM driver, but I didn't know how to confirm that it was actually running things or not. But anyway, it did work, and I could use my the SkyX program to control which way the telescope was pointing. But it was, it was a little bit herky-jerky. I wasn't thrilled with it. And B, I was always afraid that I was about to burn out the hand controller, because it was trial and error. Oh, this cable works. I don't know why, and I don't know why the other one didn't. So it can be done, but it was a little scary.
Well, I have a virtual Windows machine I could try with that, but I didn't get around to trying it. But I couldn't seem to get it to work with my Mac. So this is an example of what the screen looks like for PhD2. And what you do is you start it off and you identify a guide star here. You can either do this manually by clicking on it, or you can let the software pick a guide star. And usually I find it best to pick it manually. And then you start up the guiding, and it goes through a calibration phase, which can take maybe, and it can take 4 or 5 minutes. It pushes the mount a little bit east and west and up and down, and it kind of learns how many pixels it changes in the camera for a given amount of movement or pulses sent to the mount. And so it has to figure that out first before you start guiding. And then it starts guiding, and this plot here gives you a measure of the error level in the RI, or the right ascension here in blue, and the declination in red. And this is a good example. It's quite well controlled here within about half an arc second. And this is the type of behavior you want to see. Now, sometimes, I mean, it doesn't, even if you kind of just tap the mount or something, this will go haywire. So you want to be careful about how you do it. But this is the type of behavior you're looking for. And so I am able to get good control of it that way. And then the final thing is post-processing. So you take a bunch of images. I typically don't go beyond about 25-second exposures right now, because I want to get good sharp star pictures without star trails. I can probably go a little longer than that now that I'm getting the auto guiding working. And there are, of course, there are software packages that will do the stacking while you're watching. I'm not using one right now, but I just use the software that came with the ZWO camera to accumulate the images. And then I use PixInsight for the processing. But again, there are other software packages you can use. So the basic steps here, you go from the CMOS output, which is just in what they call the debayered format. And so you debayer to go to the color image. And then if you want to be careful about it, you take darks, bias frames, and flats. The darks you just take for the same exposure as the regular image, only with the lens covered up so that there's no light coming in. The bias frames are just very fast exposures that you take a few of, and they give you the read noise. They help you get rid of the read noise. The dark frames help you get rid of hot pixels and amp glow, which tends to be a kind of a bright spot in one part of the image. And then the flats you take with kind of a very flat light source. You can do it, the cheap way is you set the telescope up in the early evening and cover it with a t-shirt and look at the light blue sky and take some pictures. If you, the more advanced ways, you buy an illumination, LED illumination thing you put over the telescope and take pictures of it. But I'm just doing it, looking at the blue sky right now. And that helps for removing vignetting that you'll get to some degree, that is darkness through the edges of the images and smudges on the camera or on the lenses or mirror. Yeah.
I understand the darks and flats very well because they seem very simple and I've dealt with them some, but I never understood the bias. I do not know what read noise means. Can you explain that?
I think it's just as you're dumping the electrons off of the CMOS chip into the memory, you get some noise, some transitory noise in that process. And so it's,
I got it.
you just have to make very short exposures. You don't need a long exposure to capture that noise. In fact, you don't want a long exposure because then you'd start picking up the other type of noise that you get in the dark frames.
Okay.
It's just a different type of noise.
So it's differentiating the short shots from the long shots, not even necessarily.
Yeah, you still do it with the lens, with the telescope covered up with to keep it dark, but
you still do it with the dark.
but
Okay.
just do it for real short exposures.
Okay, so the basic technique is to differentiate the short and the long exposures.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's really cool. I did not know that. Thanks.
I mean, I've done lots of imaging processing where I haven't done any of those things, and it works okay. But I'm beginning to realize that there is a certain point to doing those things. So,
I have another very quick question.
yeah.
Do you find many hot pixels?
Do I find what?
You find many hot pixels?
I think there are a few. I don't seem to have a lot, but
Okay, because I've had two SWO cameras. My first one was 120, and they were everywhere.
yeah.
And then they seem to have worked on their manufacturing or something, because my new one, 294, I think, is just beautiful. There's just initially there were none, and now I see like 3 or 4, and I've just been removing them by hand because there's so few that I don't need to even make a hot pixel shot.
Yeah, well, I think my camera is not, I've had 2 cameras now. I think my newer camera is better than the older one too. So I think they're gradually getting rid of that. But the main reason I think you need to get rid of them is for the next step, which is the star alignment. You don't want the software to try to do alignment on a hot pixel, because then it's going to, the hot pixels stay in one place on the image no matter what's happening with everything else, and so it won't get the image aligned properly if it's picking up hot pixels. You want it to pick up stars instead of the hot pixels. But again, I haven't had too much problem with that. So you do the alignment, which for Pixel Insight it does in software for you, and then you stack those images in what they call the image integration step. And then beyond that, you do some stretching of the dynamic range. You can do noise reduction, because there still be a lot of noise in the black part of the picture that you want to get rid of. And then once you do that, you can enhance the color levels. This is just kind of example here of Andromeda, just kind of the raw image where I've actually done some stretching of the dynamic range that came out of the camera. And then this is after I do the stacking and stretching and various things to it. So, you get a much better picture after you do all of those things. So then I just thought I'd show a few examples of things I've been doing. This is Andromeda, and this is using the wide angle attachment. And I did it last fall at Tau. And then these are some other images I did in April and May, again using the Hyperstar, so I have a fairly wide angle here. So these are galaxies. They call it the Leo trio. These are 3 galaxies that are in the constellation Leo, and so this one's kind of interesting in that it's distorted looking compared to the others, and they say that it's caused by gravitational attractions from this galaxy here. They're kind of stretching it. And then Bode's galaxy is a nice one to look at. This galaxy here. Again, I've got, there's a smaller galaxy here called the Cigar Galaxy. And this was discovered in, can't see the, let's see.
So 1774 by Boda.
Yeah, so that it's been known about for quite a while. And then this is the Black Eye Galaxy. And it's kind of unusual in that it's been caused by a merger of two galaxies, maybe around 1 billion years ago. And so the outer part of it rotates in a different direction than the inner part. And so it's, you know, if you look at the better pictures of it, you can see lots of interesting structure there. And then this is the M3 star globular cluster, which has lots of individual stars in it. And it's the first object that Messier entered in the catalog himself. So it's interesting to visualize. So now these are a couple that I've started doing more recently. As I mentioned, the previous pictures were all done with this wide angle hyperstar attachment. And that's easy to use because it brings in lots of light. You don't need long exposures. And since it's a wide angle, you don't have to worry too much about auto guiding or precise alignment. But now that I've got the auto guiding working better, and I wanted to see more detail on this, and so I went to this 70% focal length reducer, and so I can zoom in on this galaxy more now and see more detail on it. And so this was actually a picture I took just last Saturday night. And so you get a little more color out of it and more detail. And so I'm glad I can get that working now, because previously I'd had trouble with this focal length reducer. I'd get too much, I didn't have precise alignment. I would get star trails coming out of it, and I couldn't really get a very good picture. So I did that. And then I've also gone back to this M101, the Pinwheel Galaxy, and done that using the shorter, the longer focal length. And again, you get a little better detail and more subtle colorations and shadings in it than you do with the wide angle picture. So that's the direction I'm headed, and both of those I should also be able to do with just my standard focal length and fit the galaxy into the picture. And so that'll take a little more care. I haven't tried that yet. Anyway, where I'm going right now is I'm trying to learn more about PixInsight. It has a fairly steep learning curve. I still haven't gotten too much into the noise reduction and color enhancement aspect of it, but I'm reading about it. I'd like to go more to the standard focal length for some of these smaller objects so I could see them in greater detail. And then eventually I want to get into doing things like nebulas and gas clouds. And I bought a Opto-Long L enhanced filter, which I think will help with that. But the challenge there is those are, the light is weaker for those things than it is for galaxies. So you've got to be able to go to longer exposures, and they're a little harder to find than galaxies. So, but I'm seeing lots of nice pictures people are showing of those. So I think it should be possible with this telescope to get into that. So that's about all I had to say for now. So any questions are welcome at this point.
Yeah, I have a question. I have a ZWO here.
Okay.
I don't know the model number, but in the back it says ASI 120MC-S.
Okay.
And I have a Mac, look, Pro, and I downloaded I can't remember what it's called now. It was Aperture. I'm trying to remember the name of the program. I could look it up, I guess, and tell you in a minute, but it looked like the program was functioning fine, but when I hooked up the ZWO to it, it wouldn't do anything. I mean, I couldn't get it to read it. I couldn't get it to like recognize it. So I heard you say something about a Mac earlier, but I was in and out at that time, I think, so I wasn't sure. Do you use a PC when you do this work, or a Mac, or do you use both?
No, I'm using a Mac. I use something called ASI Cap that came with the ZWO for capturing the ZWO pictures.
What's the name of the program? I'm going to Google it.
ASI CAP.
Okay.
You get it from the ZWO site, and they do have Mac versions of it as well as Windows.
Oh, great. So I'll try that. Yeah, I see that on the. I see.
And I mean, if you don't have the camera hooked up to a telescope, there are attachments you can get to put a regular camera lens on it, so that you can actually see things with it to test. You know, Ted has something.
And ASI 120 MC.
Yeah.
Exactly your model.
Oh, really? And what do you use, Ted?
Sorry, I had to do a bathroom break. What's the issue?
I was trying to run the ZWO through some application on my Mac, and it wouldn't recognize it, even though the application was fine.
Oh no, I haven't had any problem. In fact, this is the only SWO camera I tried that Zoom actually recognizes.
Oh, and that's
so it's
phone. And you have a Mac?
I don't have a Mac.
Okay.
Just
Don,
Windows.
didn't you say there was drivers for the camera that had to be installed?
No, not really for the. I don't think there was a driver for the camera, or if there is, it comes with this ASI Cap software.
All right, I'll download that.
Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just at the threshold where I'm starting to get ready to do the darks and the flats and the bias frames. And one thing I noticed is that my camera, when it's fully attached and as tight as it can be, can completely rotate just very easily. So now I have no way to make sure that it's at the exact same angle that it was at on another day, or that if I take the flats at a different time, if they're does it matter whether with the camera angle, does that will that affect the way the flats come out, the way the bias frames come out, any of that?
Yeah, I think it does. It may not bother the bias frames, but I'm pretty sure for the darks and the flats, you want to have it at the same angle.
That's kind of what I thought. The bias frames, or the flat frames in particular, right? Aren't those the ones that are seeing the actual, like, the light through the telescope where you have to have? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
I mean, with mine, it only screws into a certain point, and it pretty much stops. You can't move it around other than unscrewing it. Now, you could kind of put maybe a little mark of paint or something on the camera and the scope where you're comfortable with using it, and that way you could always put it back to the same position.
Yeah, I think I might have broken something on mine, because it used to go to a point where it would stop, and now it'll just spin forever once it gets in. It doesn't go through; it just comes up to a point where it won't go any deeper, but it'll just spin freely at that point.
So maybe the screw thread is stripped or something. Or?
That's what I'm guessing, something like that. I don't know. I'll have to see if I can figure out a way to make it stop at a certain point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The deep sky cameras I've used take a dark immediately before every light. And that way it's really synced up really well. Really nice feature, I think.
I use Sharp Cap. When I use Sharp Cap, and when I with it always orients the hot frames. The one for hot pixels. I mean the dark frames for hot pixels automatically. I never even thought of the camera being at a different angle, but of course it's at a slightly different angle every time.
I found
So-
that the application I wouldn't recognize by ZWO. It's called Fire Capture. Have you guys heard of Fire Capture?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't actually used it. In fact, I think I have it.
And I don't know if PH2 is available for
I
Mac.
have it.
Oh, PH2 is good on Mac too?
Yeah, it's made for Macs.
Okay, cool. But for that,
the issue here is how you connect the computer to the telescope.
right, and that's my problem. I don't have a mount with that connection capability.
Yeah.
But that's where the aligning it really well would be the key then to good photographs.
Yeah, as long as you can get it pretty well aligned, and if you're taking pictures of fairly bright objects, you probably can get by without the auto guiding.
Don, I have a question.
Yeah.
It appears to me it seems like you would want to take your reference frames, biases, and so forth just before your observing session, and that especially temperature would be critical. Is that the case?
Yeah, you want to do it at similar temperature. Now, this camera that I'm using is a cooled camera, so I can, through the software, I can tell it what temperature I want it to be at.
I see.
So I can control that. If you don't have a cool camera, then you might want to be a little more careful about it.
Yeah, I've heard that specifically about the DSLRs, that you're supposed to try and do, what is it, the dark frames immediately after your light frames.
Yeah.
I have some experience with that with Sharp Cap, which I recommend to everybody. That it remembers the temperature that you took the dark frame at, and if you when you're bored, if you take a few dark frames and just add them to the collection, it ends up with a library of temperature-dependent dark frames, and it'll choose itself the one with the best match to your current observing conditions. And yeah, when it gets hotter, you get more hot pixels.
Yeah.
So exponential in 1 over temperature.
You know, it would be interesting, Don. Some of the last pictures you showed were a comparison of your zoomed out version with your zoomed in version.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to just digitally zoom in on your zoomed out version and compare side by side that way.
Yeah, actually, I can maybe, I've done that, and I maybe can show that here. Let me see if I can.
Because that's super interesting.
So it's zoom. I've enlarged the left one to about the same size. It's maybe a little smaller still, but you can see there it's more pixelated and not quite as good as the one on the right.
That's a huge difference. But we don't know the exposure times for these either.
Yeah, well, the one on the right had to have a longer exposure time, certainly.
Right.
So
I mean,
it took more time. And
Were these both taken with the same camera or what?
yeah, same camera.
Okay, wow, that is a big difference.
Different focal length.
Okay.
And the one on the right still has some color noise in it that I haven't gotten rid of. I think I can improve that, but I haven't quite learned the techniques for that yet.
Yeah, I have another question. There are so many post-processing programs. How did you choose PixInsight when there's so many options?
Well, it seemed like it was the one people were using a lot that were kind of more serious about it. And it does have what I've been using. What I use more routinely about it right now are it has some batch processing scripts that do these. It does the first 3 or 4 of those steps.
Yeah.
You point it to where your images are, where the darks are, and everything, and then you just hit go, and it does it for you.
Very helpful.
So you can do it that way, or you can do the individual steps yourself and tinker with things a lot. So it has a lot of things you can get into, or you can just do it in a more automated way. Now there's also this ZWO cameras has something called ASI Studio, I've noticed, which is supposed to do this type of thing for you also. And I think it will do the real-time stacking as you're taking the pictures. But I haven't quite figured out how to use it yet. It doesn't seem to have a lot of instructions with it. So, but in principle, there's another free example there you can get
Right.
from the camera maker.
Yeah. And then PixInsight's like $200 or $250 or something like that.
Yeah.
I have a question about that too. I had the impression, I mean, I started looking into PixInsight a little bit, but it looked like you could spend an infinite amount of money buying all the different options and sub packages and things like that. I thought, my God, this is a universe. Do you have any PixInsight 101 instructions for what everybody must do for the first step and the second step, like download this version of it and stuff like that?
Yeah, there are lots of videos available, and so that's how I got started with it. I just got a video of, this is how you get started with it, which is you do the debayering, you do the SAR alignment, and then you do the image integration. So those are the basic steps that I got started using with it. And then you have to do there's a way to stretch the dynamic range at the end of that so you can see things better. But it's, for some people, it's a whole way of life. I mean, it has all sorts of things to it, but I haven't found that much that you had to buy to add to it other than I did buy the book on it. And some of the better videos you pay for, but there are lots of free ones out there too that you can use on it. So,
well, that's great, everybody. I think we've both enjoyed it. So, Don, thanks for the program.
okay, well, thank you.
Hey, everybody.